I'm Tom Hudspeth, and ever since I came to Burlington in 1972, the Intervale has played a very important role in my life and subsequently my family's. My wife, our daughters as they grew up, and even now our 4-year-old grandson and 6-month-old granddaughter when they come visit us from Putney. I like to take long walks in the Intervale, almost always with the dogs, bike some on the road, and in the winter cross-country ski, except when I have both knees replaced. I love to commune with nature. So I've seen lots of beavers, a few mink, lots of foxes, and even some coyotes crossing over the frozen Winooski River, a whole pack of coyotes one time. While I've never seen bear, I have found bear scat on a few occasions, nor have I ever seen moose, but I did see the moose tracks, the big hoof prints for the moose that wandered around in the Intervale a few years ago that I'm sure quite a few of you did encounter. And of course, lots of birds, including bald eagles along the river and in the former Intervale compost site. And great rafts of mergansers, common and hooded mergansers, around the bend of the river in the wintertime lots of times. I also like to botanize, especially in that rich silver maple, ostrich fern, nettle forest, riverine floodplain forest that's often on a hot summer day easily 20 degrees cooler in the shade than the nearby adjacent farm field. It's been sad for me to notice the changes in the lower herbaceous layer of that floodplain forest over time. Back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, I would see very colorful spring wildflowers at this time of year. And keep in mind, we're very late spring this year. We should have all these things I'm going to mention. Bloodroot and hepatica and trout lily and lots of different kind of violets and even some trillium. But over the past couple of decades, they've all been smothered by the invasive plant called agapodium, bishop's weed or gout weed, and to a lesser degree by another invasive, the Japanese knotweed. Our family has gone on to the Intervale lots as our daughters grew up, picking blueberries at Adams Berries when it was there, picking pumpkins at Fat Mitchell's Pumpkin Patch when it was there, and strawberries at Full Moon Farm when it was there, all along getting to know many of the farmers, quite a few of whom are former environmental studies or natural resource students, and many of whom we would also see regularly at the Burlington Farmers Market on Saturdays. In the early 90s, one summer we joined the CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, associated with ICF, Intervale Community Farm. I think it was the second year they had the CSA. And when we bought our share in the fall, we had these visions of going down every week and picking up our share and getting, tomatoes and lettuce and squash and beans and beets and onions and so forth. And that summer was very cold and very wet. And ICF did not have the hoop houses at that point. So when the summer came along, we were somewhat disappointed when we go down and those vegetables I mentioned, there would be relatively skimpy little portions of those, but there would be volumes and volumes of bok choy and cilantro. So needless to say, we had to become somewhat creative that summer in coming up with culinary uses of these bushels of bok choy and cilantro. I've also helped glean for the food shelf, usually zucchini squash. And sometimes, I've never seen zucchini squash that are that big before, but they get that big in the Intervale. And I've also helped out together with some of the Intervale Conservation Nursery staff and other volunteers in collecting cuttings of red twig dogwoods and seeds and nuts and berries. And as Travis mentioned, I served on the board of directors of Intervale Center from 2005 to 2010. So 3 years ago, I retired from teaching and doing research in environmental studies and natural resources at the University of Vermont after 43 years. My teaching approach was to provide active, engaged, authentic, hands-on experiential learning opportunities for the students, blending theory with practice, and often having service learning opportunities where the students could engage with community partners in real-world problem solving that hopefully benefited the community partners. More often than not did benefit the partners, I should add. And often those partnerships had some relationship with some of the research that I was doing at the time and the writing that I was doing at the time. including Intervale Foundation and subsequently Intervale Center. One of the courses was environmental interpretation, which has to do with communicating about natural history and cultural heritage and environmental issues to visitors to national parks and nature centers, museums, botanical gardens, zoos, forests, or farms like the Intervale. And for that class, the students would develop interpretive master plans and self-guided trails and exhibits for such partners as the Green Mountain Audubon Nature Center in Huntington, the Kingsland Bay State Park, Green Mountain National Forest, and many others. But for the last couple of decades, the focus of the course became pretty much interpreting food and beverage in Vermont. And so the partners for which the students developed their interpretive media tended to be like Champlain Chocolates on Pine Street and Cold Hollow Cider Mill in Waterbury Center, and of course the Intervale Farms, the farms in the Intervale Center. The 25 seniors in the environmental interpretation class gained valuable experience leading almost 300 first-year Environmental Studies 1, Introduction to Environmental Studies students on field trips, on guided field trips of the farms in the Intervale during the week in the fall semester when the students were studying sustainable agriculture and agroecology in their readings and lectures. In the early 90s, our family joined CSA, Community Supported Agriculture, one summer. And I think it was the second summer that IC Intervale Community Farm had sponsored it. And when we signed up for our share in the fall, we had these visions of going down every week. And I already went there. Sorry. Okay, so I've got there. Okay, so the interpretation class, back to the interpretation class. Besides that class, there was a creating environmentally sustainable communities class. And over a quarter of a century for that class, I developed over 300 sustainability stories about individuals and groups in the greater Burlington area who serve as role models or exemplars for others to follow in transitioning to more sustainable, environmentally sustainable lifestyles. People who inspire, encourage, empower others. These kind of creative visionaries who have a vision of a sustainable future, an alternative to the status quo, to business as usual, which in far too many cases is not sustainable at all, and then work to achieve that vision, to put it into reality. Since sustainability, development that meets the needs of current generations without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs, has become a concept or a principle some 30 years ago in the publication of Our Common Future, the Brundtland Commission report. There have been people who challenge it and are critical of sustainability, claiming that it's too vague, it's too abstract, it's just a passing fad, or it's something that happens in the global south, but certainly not in places like here. So my response to that has been all along to try to operationalize sustainability, to try to make it come alive, to try to make it more concrete, to humanize it and put a face on it through these stories that hopefully inspire and that are local and place-based and yet have global implications. And ideally also serve as an antidote to the doom and gloom stories that we tend to be hammered with far too often. So of these 300 stories that were developed for that class, the ones that readers and listeners have found to be by far the most engaging, most compelling, the ones that they have most follow-up questions about and want to know so much more about, have to do with the farmer program in the Intervale Center and the individual farmers in the Intervale. Incubator farmers, enterprise farmers, mentor farmers. And as most of you probably know, a lot of the incubator farmers go on to become enterprise farmers and mentor farmers. And of course, some of them successfully transition away from the Intervale when they purchase or lease their own farms, often on Vermont Land Trust conserved properties. So it's been my delight to share stories of the Intervale farmers with students in my classes over the decades, as well as with visitors to the Intervale on field trips that I lead, such as in the summers, for UVM has a campus sustainability leadership program that brings educators from across the country here. And over the decades to hundreds of participants at conferences that UVM has sponsored, conferences in environmental education, sustainable communities, environmental studies, natural resources, and ecological economics. So in summary, over the 46 years that I've had the chance to interact with this amazing and special place called the Intervale, there's been a lot of continuity. But there's also been change, much of it for the better, especially the increase in the reputation of Intervale Center for its farm program and for especially the incubator farmer program. It's providing a replicable model of local, organic, place-based agriculture that provides a sustainable alternative to the conventional, faceless, industrialized agriculture that mines our topsoil, that pollutes with herbicides and pesticides, and that uses fossil fuels to transport food on an average of 1,500 miles from where it's grown or produced to where it's consumed. So sustainability and community building are right here before us, right before our very eyes, right now, and the folks in the Intervale Center are leading the charge. Thank you.